everyone. On behalf of all of us here at King's University College, I warmly welcome you to this evening's Religious Life Lecture. Our theme, Ecclesia Semper Reformanda, the Church always being reformed, was carefully chosen to examine the primary documents of the Second Vatican Council from diverse perspectives, such as liturgy, scripture, the Church's teaching on sexuality, interreligious dialogue, and the evolving role of women. This evening, we are pleased to welcome Sister Miriam Martin, who will explore with us the many changes that have occurred in religious life since Vatican II, and how women religious are responding with fidelity to this call of the gospel in new and surprising ways. And now I just have a few housekeeping items before I introduce Miriam. As always, all of our lectures are videotaped, and they are always made available online approximately 2 or 3 weeks from tonight. So you will be able to get that. You will be able to go to the King's website to the Religious Life Lecture Series, and there will be a link there for you to access this lecture. However, if you'd like to have your own copy, you can purchase a DVD at a cost of $25, and you can do that after this evening's presentation, and Alex is at the back of the room, and she can help you with that. Our refreshments have been made possible through the generosity of the Department of Alumni Affairs, and we welcome any alumni who might be here with us this evening. And I'm always amazed at how many King's alum there are that kind of walk through the halls of King's. So if there are any here tonight, you're very welcome. This year, our free will donations will be shared between 2 very worthwhile initiatives: Campus Ministries' experiential learning trip to Northern Saskatchewan and the Limberlost Chaplaincy Association. As many of you know, the Limberlost community is an ecumenically based community that ministers to those families and individuals who are facing economic challenges while trying to create a new and better life through access to educational, spiritual, and community supports. Campus Ministries' experiential learning trip to Northern Saskatchewan will provide a 2-week opportunity for some of our students to broaden their understanding of the social, economic challenges experienced by Canada's First Nations peoples, as well as the Church's praxis regarding enculturation and spirituality. And finally, if you would like to be on our mailing list, or if you've been left off of our mailing list inadvertently, there's a list for you at the back of the room that you can sign, and we'll make sure that you get added to that list. And now I'll introduce Miriam. Miriam Martin has worked in religious education in a variety of ways throughout her adult life. Miriam prepared for her teaching career with undergraduate work at Mount St. Vincent in Halifax, and followed that with studies in education at Memorial University in Newfoundland. As a presentation sister, she has ministered in a range of positions in parish and diocesan settings, always with passion for adult faith formation. Miriam did her graduate work at the Toronto School of Theology and received her doctorate in education from Ontario Institute for Studies in Education. During the last 16 years at St. Paul's, she has taught courses in religious education at all levels and has received the Ontario Lift Award for Excellence in Leadership in University Teaching. Miriam has been the director of the Summer Institute in Pastoral Liturgy and was instrumental in founding the Summer Institute in Religious Education. She is presently the director of the Religious Education Program in the Faculty of Theology and is the coordinator of the programs in Practical Theology for the university. She was named by the university and as the Mercy and Presentation Sisters Chair in Religious Education and Catechesis in 2007. As if that weren't enough, as a singer-songwriter, Miriam's passion for faith formation also echoes the growing concerns that exist between education in faith and eco-theology and social justice. As a member of the Presentation Sisters music is also shaped by the prayer and discernment found in living in the communal vision and mission of her congregation. Miriam has just served 2 consecutive terms as a counselor on her congregational leadership team. She continues to find the Faculty of Theology and St. Paul University to be a creative and supportive environment for the work of religious education, catechesis, and faith formation. Miriam has had the opportunity to share her work and her music in an ongoing way with academic research, workshops, and speaking and singing engagements nationally and internationally. And so I invite you to join me in welcoming Sister Miriam Martin.
What do you say after something like that? Hearing your parts of your life, at least, spoken out loud in public. So, you're not going to be surprised, perhaps, that I might start with a wee confession. When Sister Susan called me or contacted me about coming to speak in this lecture series, I listened and thought, wow, this is very interesting. At the same time, I was preparing for a conference in an academic setting. And I suppose I had my academic glasses on. So as she's talking about this expertise in religious life, I'm saying, scrambling in my brain saying, I'm not an expert in religious life. Now, who in Canada could do that? Who could talk to people about religious life and the changes out of Vatican II? And I think I actually mentioned that to Susan. This is not my field of expertise. And she fed back a little something to me, and a real dialogue began then, not just the one in my head. And I have to say that when I thought further, I thought, who better than someone who has lived for 34 years in religious life and experienced a variety of these changes, and who has also had the experience of being able to study and reflect, and having the opportunity to look at our charism as a congregation and think about how those changes shaped our mission statements since Vatican II. And so I guess my confession is that after my initial reluctance, I was delighted to have the task to prepare for this evening. Because not only have these changes in religious life from the urgings of the Second Vatican Council shaped religious life in North America, but these are the very things that have mapped and marked and shaped my life. So, as the poet Mary Oliver would say, I'm still firmly convinced that this is a good way for me to spend my one wild and precious life. So, for those experts in religious life in the room who've been at it longer than me and who've given it great reflection, I beg your indulgence. When I thought about this, the first thing I thought of was, how on earth, this is our gals in their full get up and go, how on earth did we get as a group of religious women from there to here? How did we get from there to here? And what I'm proposing to chat with you about tonight are three things. I want to look just briefly at some of the history of apostolic religious life as we know it, that life that's focused on ministry and the call to serve with love. And I will use a few points from Sandra Snyder's because she really is an expert. After that, I want to give it a bit of flesh by talking about the story of my own community. And since the sisters were very kind from the archives to give me access to some pretty interesting material, I thought I would share that with you. And then finally, I want to make the link that has had our community and many communities across North America look at the powerful connections between those who are made poor and the struggles of the integrity of earth. When Sandra Snyder's talks about apostolic religious life and its history, she points back to monasticism and how the roots of monasticism and the spirituality of monasticism shaped and conformed what would be apostolic religious life in the Roman Catholic tradition. And I want to focus on some of those experiences. But looking at our own, I want to take us from our founding charism to look at what happened to us, what changed with us from that founding charism with the rule of enclosure, and how that carried us into the fertile years of Vatican II and what the renewal had to offer us. Once upon a time, long ago in the very back of the beyond, in the beginning, in the presentation beginning, we have a valiant woman of faith by the name of Nano Nagel. She was born in the times in Ireland when the penal laws controlled the ability of Roman Catholics to be educated, to gather, to own land. It was a pressure, really, in hopes that the good people of Ireland would join the Church of Ireland. Because Nano was born in a family of some means, she was educated in France, and there educated with the Ursuline sisters. She was to enter the Ursulines for a period of time, but was haunted by the memory of the poor in Ireland and the destitution they suffered and their inability to better their lives. So she probably did an unthinkable thing in those 1700s. She up and left the convent. She went home and began schools under the radar of the law, and under the radar of the bishops who are under the radar of the law. I don't know what metaphor they would use for it, because of course they didn't have any radar then, did they? But they flew under. So here she was, indeed a woman of faith, of action, attentive to the suffering of others, and with a focus for justice and service. And she was a woman who saw education as a means for social transformation. And does that not ring? Because this is a vision many founders of religious communities share, especially the most marginalized, especially women, the poor, and the disenfranchised. education as a means of social transformation. With Nano's passion and service to the poor, and with the establishment of many of these illegal schools, she found herself in her mid-50s wondering how this essential work for the good people of God was going to continue when she was no longer able to do so. So in an attempt to keep the schools and the other charitable works going, Nano invited an Ursuline group to come. And she put her money and her energies under the radar, because this all had to be under the radar. And the good sisters of Ursuline sent a community, and they came. And of course, the good sisters, because they were long established, had to observe the rule of enclosure. So instead of her several schools across being tended, it could only be the one that was within the enclosure of the convent church and school. As a result, at 56, Nano found herself a founder of a new order, something she didn't anticipate. Initially, the sisters were called the Sisters of the Charitable Instruction of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. I'm kind of grateful that we lost that one. Later, they were to become the Sisters of the Presentation of the Blessed Virgin Mary, of Newfoundland and Labrador, if I give you the full title. And it was out of this fledgling community that the Sisters of Presentation emerged. And like many religious orders who were founded as would later be called true apostolic communities, in order to flourish in the church, they had to accept enclosure. And 25 years after Nano's death, in order to keep the flame of her lantern alive, she was known in Ireland as the Woman of the Lantern. In order to keep her spirit and the schools and the ministries flourishing, the local bishop at the time petitioned Rome, and the congregation was established. And this was to cast the frame of reference for the life of Presentation sisters, really up until the Second Vatican Council. So just what is it about this monastic character that had difficulties for these religious women? The three things that we identify were the habit, the rule of enclosure, and the horarium. When I first entered the community, they were still using that language, and it took me a couple of days to figure out what they were talking about. And of course it was, you know, the rule of the day, the order of the day. The habit for us as Presentation sisters, as you have seen, certainly provided a very identifiable and visible sign. So, as is sometimes problematic today, not so then. It was not difficult to tell who the nuns were in the room. Enclosure, keeping to the convent grounds. And usually the convent, the school, and the church was never far away. In our community, you could actually go through a little passage. You didn't have to go outdoors. So the sisters stayed pretty much where they were meant to be. So not only did you know who they were, you had a good idea of where they were. And then with the horarium, Not only did you know who they were and where they were, but often you had a pretty good idea of what, generally speaking, they would be up to. Because the day was very ordered. There would be their ministry preparation, prayer, spiritual reading, recreation, and the normal details of running a house and convent life. And when I thought about the pictures that came from our archives about recreation, do you know what recreation is? These gals are recreating. Actually, I think in the lower one, they're making hay for the cow that kept them going all winter. But they look like they're having more fun than the ones that are recreating on the top. I figured this one was an outing. You notice the accoutrement in the sisters' hands. There's a ball. There are some leaves. So I was wondering if it had been a picnic. Then, of course, we have to get our exercise. And the gals who are on the roller skates, they have my vote of courage. It wouldn't be me. Now this would be me. There's just a little difference between recreation here and recreation here. This was the gang who was around in the late 70s when I entered. And we had been playing soccer on our house of prayer grounds, trying not to make a noise for the retreatants. And we had a conversation at dinner about those who were a part of our group or our band. And, you know, we were talking about how so many sisters left. And I said, well, you know, my band is really good because there's 50% of us who stayed. There were 2 of us who entered at the same time. The church is always reforming. And as great parts of religious life were continuing to take shape from those founding years, and as religious continue to respond to the needs of those around, in the church and in the community, a new form of religious life really took place. And by 1900, when Pope Leo XIII acknowledged, because there was some tension between the monastic life and the apostolic life. But Leo XIII acknowledged that there were congregations of women who would be known, as he says in this document, as apostolic religious. And they would form congregations of women that would be devoted to the works of the apostolate. In some ways, this simply celebrated what had emerged over time among the people of God and among the sisters in response. But in another way, it continued to highlight the tensions that monasticism affected on those who are living very busy apostolic lives. They worked hard to balance concerns with mission and ministry, the care of those around them, with the demands of enclosure and the horarium. I heard, when I first entered, I heard many stories of folks talking about the pull. They would be in school, working with kids, maybe somebody in a very difficult or challenging situation, and the 4 o'clock bell would go, and they knew they had to be in the chapel in 5 minutes. Real struggle. The winds of change and the winds of the Spirit of God continued to blow. And the great groundswell of life and movement in the church and in the world that brought about the Second Vatican Council II. This momentous event this great aggiornamento and this lecture series, I think, is so powerful to remind us of the great window opening. But the most significant document for those religious orders of women was the decree on the adaptation and renewal of religious life. But it was impossible for me to think about this renewal of religious life without considering the whole groundswell of the spirit of Vatican II. This decree, that most of us, it was the first document that I was given as a young novice to study. This decree challenged religious orders to the roots, to go back to the founding impulse, to go back to the core values, to the charism, to the originating gifts. And what it began, I believe, is a process of renewal that continues to today. It isn't over. The renewal was not only based on going back to the foundings, to the founders of religious communities, but it was also at a time of incredible ferment in the culture and in life in general. Think of the liberation movements. And think of the education of women. And some of a single group of women who in this time became one of the most highly educated single group of women in North America were Roman Catholic women religious. This had a profound effect. The scripture study, you might think, as some of the kids I teach would say, that's a no-brainer. But a story from my own community of women who entered, who are about my age, give or take, maybe a little older, but who entered 10 years before me. One of the great scandals that was reported to the Mother Superior was that the sisters in formation, they didn't call them that then, of course, they said the white novices are in the chapel, and do you know what they were doing? Reading the scriptures, praying the scriptures of the day, by themselves. So our understanding of what opened up for religious, with the study in general, but the study of theology, of scripture, the sister formation movement, the retreat movement, it was an enlivening and a deepening of religious life. And as I say, I believe it's still going on. In the context you've been looking at here, the renewal of the whole church, once again, I just reiterate, so important to see that religious are a part of the church as well, now a part of the culture. The church in Vatican II called us to recognize the pains and sufferings of the world as our very own. I have some students who, when I talk about Vatican II, they're born after 1980, and they think about it as a historical event, something that happened in the past that has little relevance to the present, except historically. But as one who came to religious life during this time of religious revival and deepened spirituality, such a hunger for God, what an ecumenical fervor and ferment there was. We were in and out of each other's churches and synagogues. The liturgical renewal, the people of God, the body of Christ. The universal call to holiness. The renewal of justice teachings. The connections with the liberating God. This was an evocative and powerful, life-changing experience for many of us, and it cannot be relegated to the annals of history. We need moments like this. The documents that I listed here are ones that simply stood out to me, and how our lives and the lives of those with whom we were engaged were so powerfully changed and challenged by this experience. What happened between those gals in those great outfits and today? Lots happened. And how I'd like to frame some of my reflections around that are to talk about an experience that we identify in Christianity as the Paschal Mystery. An experience that's identified in the New Universe story as the whole evolutionary experience of life giving way to new life. This mystery is through and in us all. So I just want to talk about what I saw and experienced and would reflect on as being some of the things that were living, some of the things that were dying, and some of the things that were rising in the period of the 80s, late 70s for us, 80s and 90s. What was living? Well, when I first entered in the late 70s, it was a really interesting place to be, because there's a little phrase in Newfoundland that says, come here, go away. Come here, go away. It's usually kept for, relationships, when two people can't figure out what they want to do. So come here, go away. Well, it was a bit like that when I first entered the community. The community was at the cusp of many changes, and it was full of really interesting experiences. What was living in that experience were the energies and the excitement, first of all, around trying to figure out who we were now. So we had that job of the constitutions and statutes. But underneath all those words were all kinds of conversations about the meaning of religious life, about the meaning of commitment, about the meaning of mission. It was a very strong moment. Also, new ministries, different opportunities, calls that came from different places were heard in a way that in our group we hadn't heard before. And I think the church even called it in those days experimentation, but I think that's a naughty word today, so we won't use that. But there's new ministries, new opportunities. And trying to find new ways to gather and organize ourselves. Circular discussion around circular models of leadership and gathering. And having the community together discern the ordered prayer life of the day. And the really interesting experiences we had, particularly in those early days, with other women's groups and movements. And I remember myself and one of the more senior sisters being invited to a woman's gathering, which was to be on a holistic spirituality. And we were late getting there. I had to sit right in the front of about 400 women. And the first presentation was already started, and it was on the photography and work of Judy Chicago. And the sister that was with me had a little trouble seeing as well as hearing. So in a stage loud whisper, she said to me, "What is that, flowers?" I said, "Yes, sister, yes, sister, yes, sister." Those were exciting times. Those were interesting times. We also engaged with the other religious congregations, and for us on the island it meant some of the young redemptorists and with the mercy novices and young religious. You know, it was good stuff. The other colors. Some communities called it the Grand Exodus. We had a loss of membership. As the doors were opened, they were opened. And again, a tale from before my novitiate time. One of our highly regarded, loved, and often teased novice directors of the time just previous to Vatican II was, "This door swings both ways, sister." And in the loss, we experienced that swinging. We lost friends, we lost leaders, we lost visionaries, and we lost women who only went to come back again another way. Many of the women who left during that period of time remain close to our community and have come back and are even in shared ministry with us now. One in particular is with us on the island of Dominica. So interesting, those losses. Also, if we were looking for who we were, it was because we didn't remember who we were. And the identity confusion was very difficult, more difficult for some than others. And what goes on, the closing of convents, and sometimes the opening of houses. But difficult, loss. And also a loss, in different ways, were some of the struggles that we had with our local church communities. But the rising in these years what has kept us believing that this is the place for our one wild and precious lives. One of the things that I have found remarkable is the holistic approach to what it means to be a healthy spiritual human being. Our sisters have done a lot of personal work. The excitement of new ministries for us was interesting from the point of view that when we got older and smaller, that's when we decided to risk and went beyond some of the boundaries that we had made for ourselves. Also, some real delight in new collaborations. People that we never thought we'd be working with. I'll show you a little example in a moment of that. And for us, on that rock, half an hour away from any decent time zone, could be a bit isolated. For us, appreciating the global community, being a part of the North American conference of Presentation Sisters, 7 other congregations and ourselves. And in the last 20 years, working with the International Presentation Association, which gathers the Society from Australia, the North American Conference, and the Union of Presentation Sisters. The mother house is in Ireland, and it ministers in 17 different countries. So this expanded world, finding out that the presentation world was bigger, this has also been a marvelous thing. And it's in part what led us into the movement toward the ecological crisis and understanding and appreciating that the ecological crisis is a religious crisis. And as religious, it has to be our crisis. This is an interesting little snap. The top picture is our convent in Carbonear, and I see some folks who would understand a convent that had 15 bedrooms. And underneath, you will see what it is today. It opened last year. It's called O'Shaughnessy House, named after the youngest of the 4 women who came from Ireland in 1833. The first English-speaking congregation in what is presently Canada, because Newfoundland wasn't a part of Canada then. But in 1833, well, nobody was, were they? But in 1833, when the sisters came, the youngest was a woman called Magdalene O'Shaughnessy. And we worked with a women's shelter group and 18 different agencies. And 2 years ago, we were able to give them this house as a shelter for women. And they were able to work and get the funding to open it last year. So it opened on our 175th anniversary, O'Shaughnessy House. So the kinds of collaboration that have drawn us into worlds and places we wouldn't have dreamed of. We had a gathering that year to celebrate our 175th 2 years ago. And we couldn't take all of our sisters to the International Presentation Gathering, so we invited the international sisters to come to us. And what a grand time we had. So, as Thomas Berry says, to tell the story of anything, you have to tell the story of everything. So I hope that I've done a little something to stir your imaginations about this story of something that I hope will stir your stories for everything. And I'd like you to hear this story and see it in another way. This is a piece of music that has slides to accompany it that I hope will let you hear and sense what I have been saying, perhaps in a more exciting way.
Fire to the rock, rock from the fire, from the beginning the universe desire to share the abundance, the healing of life. Fire to the rock, rock from the fire. Their story then, our story now. Spinning through space, the wild room of emptiness poured forth with grace. The fire of beginnings burst open with life, and the planets and stars flung out through the night. Fire to the rock, rock from the fire. From the beginning, the universe desire to share the abundance, the teeming of life. Fire to the rock, rock from the fire. Their story then, their story now. In the story of earth life, a new
our story now. The presentation story, more than 250 years ago, was a spark of this original fire. It blazed its trail and spread through Ireland and across the globe. So many sparks have made their way out of such founders and such places. Angela Merici of the Ursulines, Mary Ward of the Lorettos, Marguerite Bourgeois of the Congregation de Notre Dame, Louise de Marillac of Providence, and Pierre Médaille and Mother St. John Fontbonne of the Joes, the Sisters of St. Joseph. We are here today because we are interested in that spirit that seeks to harness the energies of love, and we want to be a part of the generation that does kindle that fire for a second time. Jiddu Kanato, speaking to Women Religious, said, "All of us are fired with love's urgent longings because we are a part of the original flame that brought all life into being. We are invited by this new cosmic consciousness to awaken to the holy fire that was, is, and always will be. We come from that original fire of the Spirit, the flaring forth of that incredible love energy which has never stopped flowing, claiming the heart of the universe. We have learned love is the mystery at the heart of the universe. And that is the fire that is lighting up the sky, the fire that remains soft still in the belly of the earth. The Hebrew people heard the voice of God, the living God, speaking from the heart of the fire. Is that the fire that Jesus spoke of in such a great yearning that it be blazing across the earth? This is the fire of the new dreaming that we have learned as a species from our ancient seeking. And we who have heard this are trying to awaken and awaken ourselves to a new consciousness of our sacred beginnings. This is the challenge Thomas Berry placed before us as Women Religious, calling us to be about the great work of transformation, to work to change human-earth relationships from destructive and disruptive to beneficial and mutual, mutually enhancing. And I think one path to this transformation is through our religious imaginations, our mystical sensibilities, through the gifts of awe and wonder, to grasp some aspect of this magnificent story. Mary Oliver, in her poem An Instruction for Life, sums it up quite simply, like a poet can. What do we need to be about? We need to pay attention. We need to be astonished. And then we need to tell about it. Most of us are not scientists, but we are seasoned preachers and teachers, storytellers, healers, guides, counselors, and I would say faith-filled wild women. We bring these gifts to the community charisms that we have been nurtured in: wisdom, reconciliation, hospitality, respect. And we have listened to the cry of the earth and to the cry of those made poor. The voices are different, but the song is the same. We have seen these deep concerns echoed in many of the mission statements of women religious congregations. Quick highlights. Taken these from the mission statements of the St. Joe's, the Providence, the Ursulines, and ourselves. And you see the echoes. All across the country and beyond, women religious have heard and are responding locally and globally to these grave issues for the fullness of life for all and life for all. The journey of the scientists from Aristotle to Einstein to our present day have revealed to us some of these mysteries. Brian Swim says, our ancestry stretches back through life forms into the stars, back to the beginnings, the primal fireball. And we have come to know who we are and whose we are. We are the only generations who have seen what our eyes have seen. We know this to be home. The tiny spark that was tinier than a mustard seed, smaller than a teardrop, as the poet says, holding the potential to flame and flare forth. That shining stardust of the universe, that is you and that is me. And somehow, the Spirit that opened the windows in Vatican II and breathed the breath of fresh life in the church has breathed this path for women religious in so many ways, and for all of us who are called to the holiness and fullness of life. Ours is a magnificent story to realize, to contemplate with astonishment, and to tell about it. It is a new dreaming and an ancient seeking.
our time for questions. So if I might bring the mic up for us, I just ask if you would like to ask Miriam a question, if you would use the microphone, because it helps us to record your questions on the tape. So don't be shy. Come on forward.
Just don't make them too hard.
I really enjoyed the presentation, and I think for me, I worked in the library at St. Paul State, and it was the early days when they were, the canon law was gathering all the books on the founders and foundresses of religious communities, and I think for me, I was only Catholic on doing the research and everything, but what touched me was the spirit of praying hands. And your presentation presented it. Thank you.
Thank you. Our connectedness.
What is going to harm religious life?
Oh, what a brilliant question from Lorna Bowman, one of my old teachers. She shouldn't be here, should she? We had this discussion at lunch. I was with the sisters at the residence. Yes. And I told the story. So, like a good Maritimer, that's what I'm going to do, Lorna. One of my good friends that I worked with when I was a university chaplain, his brother was dying of cancer. And Joe had a very good kitchen garden. He was a farmer fisherman. Now, do you know a kitchen garden? In Newfoundland, a kitchen garden is called a kitchen garden because it feeds the kitchen for the year, or thereabouts, as much as you can manage to stretch them. So Joe was wanting to plant his kitchen garden, and the family knew that Joe wasn't going to be alive when it was harvested. And so the boys said, "Dad, we really don't think you should plant the garden this year." And Joe said, boys, this is the year for me to plant the garden." So, I believe in planting the garden and in the unfolding story. We will be perhaps seeds and shoots, and we might even be a little compost.
Talk. I'm wondering if you could comment on if you notice any difference between masculine spirituality and feminine spirituality.
Oh my goodness. I bet that's a whole other talk, and I'd have to be doing it with a man for it to be authentic.
Fair enough, thank you.
But I will say this, because you tempt me, that it's very interesting how my colleagues at the university with whom I've worked with for the last 15 or so years, who belong to religious orders, their experience of the renewal of religious life has a very different texture than the women religious. And if I could quote a couple of them, they would say, you've taken it farther in terms of your living. But that's a comment that I've heard more than once from them.
Thank you very much for the wonderful talk and beautiful images and the music. I'm feel privileged to be here. I would wonder if you feel comfortable talking about more about your personal journey
I'll tell you a quick story that's really paradigmatic of most of what I've been talking about and what Schneider's is pointing to in terms of the struggles of the apostolic and monastic and how we live it and come around in circles. When I entered the community, I was a singer and a songwriter, and the sisters loved my music. And that was really neat. And when I was a novice, they were holding a concert at the Arts Center, which is a bit, up there, Tony. And they asked me if I would sing. They were holding to raise money for the Family Life Bureau. Now, it was just opening. What could have been more holy and pious a work? So I said to the chap who was organizing it, sure. And my novice director, God bless her, heard me, and she said, oh, do you think you should talk to Sister Nano about that? Now, she was our Mother General. She didn't like to be called that. She was a congregational leader. And so Sister Nano, I said, call her. Well, I mean, what would I thought, like, why would you interfere in a busy woman's, she's running the congregation, for goodness sake, what's she want to be worried about where I'm singing? I'll show you where I was coming from. And so anyway, my director of novices urged me to, call her. And I said, well, I think that's the dumbest thing you've ever asked me to do. But anyway, I got on the phone, and I called Sister Nano, and I said, look, Sister Nano, I'm really sorry to bother you. But, I was asked to do this and whatever. And she said, well, Sister Miriam, which was still a little new on my ears, the sister bit, she said, I'll have to think about it. I said, oh, okay, well, you think about it and get back to me. They're doing up the program on Tuesday. Oh, naive. So, Tuesday comes, no word from Sister Nano. So I say to my novice director, who I'm trying to remain nameless, to leave her innocent, and she said, you better call her. So, because the gentleman had called me and said that things were going to press. Well, the answer was no. And I said, Sister Nano, you're going to have to explain to me why. The nuns in the room know that I did the second cardinal sin, asking why. And she said, but Sister Miriam, you don't need to ask why. She said, and I said, I don't? And she said, no, holy obedience. I said, Sister, we've just spent 2 weeks on that vow, and it was all about dialogue, and it was about conversation and discernment. Where are we doing that? And of course she said, look, it's just going to cause trouble. You can't do it. So, very big decision for me, because this is a big part of who I am and how I express my spiritual life. So, and I was so confused. So, shortly after that, I had a birthday and was at the Mother House. Well, not shortly, a few weeks, because I was also asked to do a radio program with spirituality and sing and, spiritual reading and that kind of stuff. So when the chap asked me to do that, I was smarter this time. I said, write Sister Nano. So I knew that letter was on her desk. It was my birthday. I'm turning 25, and I'm thinking, what is this? What am I doing? We've got to talk about this. So we happened to have a class at the Mother House. So I went to the Mother House, said to darling Sister Barbara, who just turned 100, she was on the door, and I said, Sister Barbara, I need to see Sister Nano. I said, I want to see if I can see her in the next day or so. And of course, when anybody young in those days wanted to see Nano, you know what they thought? I was over the wall. So Sister Barbara said, oh, Sister Miriam, do you really want to see Sister Nano? And I said, yes, I do. So I didn't get down the corridor, and I was in Sister Nano's office. And we had a talk. And that's why Nano has died since, wonderful woman. I spent a lot of time in her office. We had a talk. And I said, you know, Sister Nano, I've got to ask you why I can't sing. You told me that when I sing, you feel it's like a prayer. I said, what is it? I said, you know, we have these sisters who direct choirs of hundreds, and they're in the art center, and they're flying to Europe with their choirs. But I said, they do their music with their back to the audience, and they're ballet dancers. And I do my music facing, and I'm a belly dancer. So her first thing was, you are not a belly dancer. And I said, no, I don't want to be a belly dancer. I don't want to be a belly dancer. I want to be a singer. I want to be able to sing. So we had the conversation, and we had a few tears, and she said, you know, yes, you can sing, because they told me I could sing in church and in school. She said, you know, you can sing. She says, as a matter of fact, I have a request for you. I said, oh, do you, Sister Nana? She said, yes, and I think you should do that. So what made the difference? I then sat down beside her and put my head in her lap and said, I just don't want you to say, okay, I want your blessing. I just don't want you to say it's okay for me to sing. I want you to bless my gift here with us. And that wonderful, wise woman wept with me and blessed me. I think that's a part of why this is where my one wild and precious life. Thank you very much for giving me all of this of time of your one wild and precious lives.
And now I'd like to invite Sister Loretta Mancera. I did neglect to say that this lecture this evening is sponsored by my community, and so I think it's fitting that Loretta, you come forward and express thanks on all of our behalf.
Well, Miriam, it's such a delight to have you with us, and your storytelling reaches deep into the heart. I know many of us in the room tonight are members of religious communities, and all through the evening there were moments when my memory was going back to such similar experiences, and just really profoundly appreciating the opportunity to sit back and to muse with you, reflect on what this wonderful life has been, because it has been a wild and wonderful life for all of us. I'm so aware when you spent some time looking at that triptych of the Paschal Mystery, the experience of living, dying, and rising. And so many of the things that Miriam posted under each of those categories has been the experience of all of us, not only in religious life, but all of us in our varied forms of life within the church and within the world. Every day we're faced with so many of those issues that cause us to really be attentive to how that Christ experience is being expressed within us. For me, that was pertinent. A very, very simple way to remind us that this call that we all love and every morning commit ourselves to is totally based in the example of Christ. And for me, most of that experience of attentiveness to living the Paschal Mystery came through that renewal offered to us with sacred Scripture. When you spoke of the dear sister sitting in chapel reading from the Bible, it sounds horrendous at this point in time, but that was the reality. So I think over the evening, you've opened up for many of us deep, deep memories of the call to grow, the experience of moving through some of the challenging times and finding the grace within it all. We're truly, truly grateful for all of that. Your gift of music and ability to pull together music and expression through those wonderful slides. Another gift to all of us in this room and to the church at large. I know your work is being received in many different places. That call, special to you, is a gift to all of us. And on behalf of my community, the Sisters of St. Joseph, and all of you who are present tonight, thank you so much for being with us and sharing your perspective on how religious life has transpired over these years, And I know that we are all going to plant that garden, whether it's
Yeah.
for compost or for the kitchen.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Let's make us skip this here. So,
And so this brings our meeting to a close. But before we depart, I just want to remind you that on Thursday, October the 27th will be our next lecture here. And we